Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
And now, the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton, sponsored by GEHA.
Welcome to the Federal Drive on Federal News Network. It's Tuesday, July 7th, 2026. I'm your host, Eric White, filling in for Terry Gerton, and I'm glad you're here. Coming up this hour of the Federal Drive, when an agency shuts down, the story usually focuses on policy and program impacts. This one looks at the people left behind. Plus, for military families with special needs children, the Exceptional Family Member Program is essential, but not simple. Those stories and much more ahead during this hour of the Federal Drive. We begin with this. The Office of Personnel Management plans to take a more hands-off approach to the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. A new proposal would make agencies, rather than OPM, responsible for surveying their own employees. OPM is also seeking to cut some currently required questions and add back in some different ones. Here with more, Federal News Network's Drew Friedman. Drew, welcome back.
Eric, nice to be with you today.
Well, happy to have you. So for some context, what has OPM's role historically been when it's passing out the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey and conducting this important questionnaire that really gives a snapshot of employee engagement?
Absolutely. And thanks for kind of giving an overview, too, of what the FEVS really does here. But for OPM's purposes, they've been administering this government-wide survey since about 2004. So for more than 20 years, each year, they are managing and distributing the survey across agencies. Now, most agencies will rely on FEVS to fulfill what are actually statutorily required surveys of their employees. So under federal statute, since 2004, agencies have been required to ask questions about leadership, employee satisfaction, the work environment, opportunities for professional development, et cetera, et cetera. And while that's required under statute, it's not OPM's requirement necessarily to be in charge of that survey, but it has been in charge of it to essentially make things easier for agencies over time. So that's really where we are today, except for, of course, in 2025, when we had a bit of an outlier year because the FEVS was not conducted at all.
All right. And so what is OPM looking to do to change the way the survey is distributed to federal employees?
So going forward, starting for 2026 and this survey cycle, agencies would be responsible for surveying their own employees rather than having OPM distribute the FEVS government-wide. So these would still require agencies to include a set of core and standardized questions that all are required to include on their surveys. But then OPM is saying in this new proposal that they can include additional questions that are more agency-specific if they'd like to. Then the idea from there, once agencies are surveying their own employees, get those results back, then they would have to report their findings and the responses that they got from employees back to OPM as well as the Office of Management and Budget so that they can do some sort of government-wide analysis akin to what we've seen in past years through FEVS. But they're generally seeming to be sort of distributing the wealth here, for lack of a better term, and having agencies do these surveys themselves rather than OPM, again, managing it government-wide, as has been the case for more than 20 years.
Talking here with Federal News Network reporter Drew Friedman. So for the questions themselves and what's contained in the actual survey, how would the FEVS questions be changed in this new proposal from OPM?
There are going to be a good number of changes to the actual questions asked, and a lot of it we still don't know because we only know what are going to be these core questions that are asked government-wide, and we don't necessarily know what agencies are going to ask individually. But if you look back to the federal statute that requires agencies to survey their employees each year, there are currently 16 questions that all agencies must ask. And these look at things, again, like leadership, satisfaction, whether you feel like you have opportunities to advance your career, whether you feel like you understand how your job matches to your agency's mission. But now what OPM is trying to do with the new proposal is bring that number 16 down to just 10 questions. and also make a good number of revisions to what agencies are actually going to be required to ask. So they're taking out, for instance, questions about employee satisfaction and about whether they would recommend their organization as a good place to work. But then on the tail end or the other end of things, add in questions asking employees about poor performers, for example. So a good number of changes, not only to the distribution of the survey here, but also to what is going to be on the survey as well.
Yeah, exactly. What happened in 2025? What wasn't there a FEVS?
That was definitely an outlier year for the FEVS. It's the first time since the survey began in 2004 that OPM simply chose not to conduct the survey at all. There have been times where maybe it's been postponed for a couple of months, but last year was the first time ever that OPM just chose not to conduct FEVS at all. The reasoning for that is not entirely clear, but they promised to bring back FEVS with a good number of changes this year, which seems to be the case given this new proposed regulation from OPM. And also, OPM Director Scott Cooper talked earlier this year about plans to bring back the survey, but then that noted that it would, for example, be slimmer and shorter and focus on what he called micro-level questions. So that might have been an allusion to the focus now being on agencies conducting their own survey. But yes, even going forward and having the FEVS for 2026, there is going to be a notable data gap without just having that survey last year at all.
Let's talk timeline for this year. When might we see the FEVS coming out, and when will employees be expected to answer them?
Not entirely clear yet. All I got from OPM was them saying that it would just be done by the end of the calendar year. But given that under this proposal, at least, agencies are required to conduct their own surveys, I'd imagine there might be slightly different timing for different agencies and depending on on where an employee works. And in the meantime, in the short term, OPM is also asking for public comments on the proposal to change both the distribution and the survey content. That's open for the next roughly 2 months for people to comment on. But I think we'll see more on this to come in just the next couple of months here.
All right, we'll have you back then. Federal News Network's Drew Freeman providing us an update on the upcoming FEVS. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
And you can find more of Drew's reporting on this at federalnewsnetwork.com. Still to come, for military families with special needs children, the Exceptional Family Member Program is essential, but not simple. It's the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. I'm Eric White filling in for Terry.
Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High-Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure, cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure, serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
You're listening to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. I'm Eric White filling in for Terry. For families who rely on it, the Exceptional Family Member Program can shape everything from assignments to access to care. Jessica Holter knows that firsthand from years spent navigating the system while caring for her daughter, and her experience sheds light on what it takes for military families to find their way through it. Federal Drive host Terry Gerton recently got the chance to speak with Jessica about that experience.
You have written about your experience navigating the military health system as a caregiver. Tell us a little bit about your family's particular story here.
Oh, gosh. Well, what feels like a million years ago, 20 years ago, my husband joined the Air Force. And very shortly afterwards, our infant daughter was diagnosed with a significant and life-limiting genetic disorder. And at that point, I think the information I learned the fastest was that my new job was as a caregiver and advocate for our young child as we moved around the country. The next few years unspooled after that.
One thing that comes through from your story is how much military families have to figure out on their own, that there doesn't seem to be an integrated program that helps navigate this process. What did you learn?
Well, I think there's a lot of an attempt at integrated programs. I think that there are a shocking number of really devoted people who are trying to pave a way for families like mine. What we found was that they tend to be discordant, and that's because of funding and because of policy, because there isn't a significant policy instituting a program office for programs that guide families like mine. They all do a little bit, but none of them quite coordinate with each other in the way that we really needed for them to help us acclimate to lives as special needs parents and as active duty military.
The Exceptional Family Member Program seems to maybe those of us on the outside as the umbrella for the kinds of services that you're talking about. But as you navigated from post to post, how did you experience both the EFMP and the differences in its delivery?
Well, the Exceptional Family Member Program is one of the programs that I'm referring to when I say that there are a lot of wonderful people doing their best with discordant services. And that really comes down to the fact that there isn't just one Exceptional Family Member Program as it's implemented. There's responsibility under that program for looking at family travel. There's responsibility for helping families once they get on base. But those responsibilities are divided between different arms of the program that really don't talk to each other, and they are not coordinated. Past that, they also don't talk installation to installation. So oftentimes you will hit an installation with exceptional people there doing wonderful work and you'll be blown away. And then you'll move to your next installation and the position you're looking for isn't even staffed. And this is what I mean. This is where we fall through the cracks, is that amazing people do exceptional work in this program, but there is nothing tying us together as we shift around the country.
Jessica Halter is an Air Force spouse of 20 years. Jessica, I want you to tell me more about the family experience here. You ultimately worked with Care Starter at Travis Air Force Base, where they became the first installation to fully meet EFMP's core constitutional mandate. How did that happen, first of all, and what difference did it make for folks in their experience?
Well, I was really looking for some place that I could go to put some of my skills and knowledge back to serve the rest of my community. And lo and behold, there were already families out there looking to do just that. So I came to work for Care Starter and eventually PCSI, the company that oversees us as an innovation unit, because I needed a space to express that. And now it's been 6 years that we have been working. We were at Travis Air Base for 4, and we saw record numbers of resources delivered to families in a way that could actually materially help them, and movement in the space of family service prior to departing your losing location that we've never seen before.
Tell me a little bit more about those specific programs and what they deliver.
Well, the Care Starter program delivers what we call a care map, which is really a care navigation plan across 6 categories. That's medical, therapy, and education. Those are your core ones. And then family support, like spousal employment and support groups, as well as nutritional support and recreational resources. Because Care Starter deeply and foundationally believes that whether you have a difference of ability or not, you are at your core just a person navigating the world and trying to live their best life. We want to support your ability to do that. And we believe that by doing that, we also support your readiness and resilience, your ability to integrate with a new base quickly and be ready for whatever life throws at you.
Parents who have special needs children are already navigating a lot of tough emotions, a lot of stress. When you mix that in with the stress of being a military family, how much more complicated and difficult does that make it?
We start over every 2 to 3 years. We're the new guy in town. We don't have the support network. We don't have the child care, even in an emergency, somebody who could theoretically take our child for 2 hours often. We need to be a stronger tribe. I love my life. I loved 20 years of service, and I loved raising my daughter. These were wonderful, exceptional experiences. They weren't just hardships, but we need programs like Care Starter to help us knit together and strengthen the tribe that we can be so that we can support each other. Because you're not wrong. This is hard. It's beautiful and wonderful and exciting. There's not a piece of me that will ever be sorry for our service, but it is very challenging and it requires us to support each other.
the need to build up those networks can take 2 or 3 years on its own. And so to disconnect them and plug them in someplace new every time you just about get them right has got to be very difficult. But the military knows about these changes. Why is it so difficult to get this problem fixed?
Because there aren't enough people to do it manually. And until now, we didn't have the technology to do it in an expedited, technology-enabled way.
And what is that new technology?
So the new technology is a platform that enables the transition of a care plan from one location to another. We can take your paperwork, your 2792, which is your medical and educational paperwork on what your dependent needs, and translate that into a care plan where we resource those needs specifically and make sure that you have a person that you can connect with directly when you get to your gaining location so that you can get that service implemented within a few weeks rather than a few months.
And you have connected these challenges directly to readiness. How does the challenge of picking up and moving in the EFMP program show up in a service member's ability to do their job?
I don't understand how any command expects any service member to arrive clean, shaven, and ready to work if they know that that service member's home life is an emergency. Every time they go home, they are worried that their spouse or their child is not getting the required medical services, or they come home to a family in tears because they feel so alone and so unsupported. The family has to be okay to show up.
And as you're working this issue, sort of from both sides, trying to help families navigate, but also pushing on the institutional rope, if you will, to try to get some structural changes, where are you seeing the most progress?
We've seen a lot of progress in the last 10 years. We see efforts to streamline and integrate the Exceptional Family Member Program, and we've seen a lot of efforts to help families transition. I think that what we need now are usable, off-the-shelf products from the civilian world to be translated and brought to bear for the military community in ways that help them be highly mobile, but also supported during that process.
And at the end of the day, what's your best advice for families who might be navigating these same hurdles that you've been through?
Lean in. I wish I knew that back when. I wish I knew to just show up and say, I need help. And if I hit somebody who wasn't exactly generous with their time or generous of spirit, find somebody else. There is a whole huge, fierce military tribe of us, of caregivers who want to support each other. And the further in you lean, the more of us you find.
Jessica Holter is an Air Force spouse of 20 years. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the practice of project management isn't static, and neither is the exam. But first, when an agency shuts down, the story usually focuses on policy and program impacts. This one looks at the people left behind. It's the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. I'm Eric White, filling in for Terry. Back here on the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. I'm Eric White, filling in for Terry. A new study is taking a close look at what happened to the workforce after the closure of the U.S. Agency for International Development, tracking the effects on jobs, finances, and health. It offers one of the first large-scale pictures of how that loss of mission played out for employees and their families. Joining Federal Drive host Terry Gerton earlier to share her research findings and recommendations, former USAID Foreign Service Officer Jamie Oberlander.
When we talk about last year's closure of USAID, we oftentimes tend to focus on the policy and the programs. But your study really dives deep on the people. What did you set out to understand as you begin this research?
So I set out to understand and document what happened to the public servants who did the work for USAID. I wanted to get a sense of where they landed, how they were doing, how they were coping, and how their families were doing 15 months after being thrown into the wood chipper.
You had responses from nearly 4,000 people. What does that tell you about how widespread the impact was?
Yeah, to be honest, I was really overwhelmed by the response rate and really moved and honored to have people share a part of their story with me, even if it's just in answering yes/no questions. It really is an honor to capture that and to represent that. But I think it really speaks to a demand and a need that The public servants who worked for USAID and in international development want their story told. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want their impact known.
And what did you hear in some of those stories about what happened to people's jobs and financial stability after USAID was shuttered?
Yeah, I think the trends are that it's a long, hard, and uneven recovery, that 40% of respondents had found full-time employment in the 15 months since the stop work order was issued on USAID programs. 40% had found full-time employment in 15 months. So that means the majority are unemployed or underemployed. For those who did find employment, 67% took a pay cut. And how we address long-term unemployment is really different from short-term job loss. And the stories really vary, but they're hard, they're painful. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of mental health issues. It's affected not only employees, but their families. Relationships have suffered. About 11% of respondents had a relationship change, either a separation or a divorce, following the dismantling of USAID. 24% of respondents said their relationship became weaker. On the flip side, 21% said their relationship became stronger, sort of those bonds forged under pressure. We also see it really differing in terms of age. When I talk about the uneven recovery, we really see it in terms of age and in terms of race, that younger employees have far greater rates of reemployment than older, more experienced colleagues, that those under 35 are employed at about over 60%, and that those 55 and over have a 21% rate of reemployment. So age really matters. And I'd say qualitatively, it's really different based on age. Those who are younger wrote about how they are still paying off their graduate school loans for a sector that's now obsolete. And maybe if they've been able to pivot and find employment, they're still facing pay cuts. For those in the middle, it's sort of a reverse Goldilocks effect, where they're too old to be competitive in a saturated job market, but too young for retirement. And those who are older and very experienced are pigeonholed into really unique government experience that isn't readily transferable or translatable to other sectors. And I think on the far end, those who are able to retire may not be impacted financially to the same extent, but have a sense of a lost legacy, that what they committed their lives and their careers to has been tarnished.
Jamie Oberlander is former Foreign Service Officer with USAID. Jamie, did you find any difference between folks who had worked as government civilians and folks who had worked for commercial providers in the aid industry?
There were small differences, but the greater trends are about the same. We still see unemployment and underemployment. We have those who worked for private sector companies have a higher rate of any employment, but we also see those who were public servants who worked for USAID directly having a greater sense of moral injury.
Let's dig into that moral injury for a moment, because you looked at these psychological and physical effects. Moral injury is a term I've often used applied to the military in times of war. How do you apply it here in this context, and why did it show up?
Well, even if USAID officers didn't wear the uniform, we served our country. And we also served humanity, providing humanitarian assistance in natural disasters, providing assistance in conflict. We served those who are more vulnerable. And moral injury is witnessing or being subject to an act that violates your deeply held personal and moral beliefs. And I think that's very much what happened to USAID, not just what happened, but how it happened. And 89% of respondents felt strongly that their deeply held moral and ethical beliefs were violated, and a very strong sense of betrayal from trusted institutions.
Jamie, how does moral injury show up in both psychological and physical symptoms? And how are you tracking recovery from something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one that warrants more research. You know, what we see in terms of what happened to USAID was it wasn't just a financial hit of losing a job. It was a psychological hit, but it also was compounded by moral injury, by this sense of one's deeply held moral code being violated. And I think recovery has to look at all three of these aspects. On the one hand, at the individual level, we need to reach out and support our affected members of the community. So many people in this survey responded with a sense of isolation, being isolated or estranged from family members who believed the false narratives espoused by USAID. But the longer that one is unemployed, the greater the likelihood of depression sets in. So I would say reaching out to people who are affected, trying to see beyond with empathy that it's more than just losing a job, that it was a deep wound. And I think also looking at programs and policies that could help. We saw in the pandemic where there was a big wave of unemployment that America responded with the CARES Act, with the American Recovery Plan, and that extended unemployment insurance to those who remained unemployed. We don't have that for federal government employees who were doged. So thinking about what state and local governments can do to support this population. And I think the more that we can do to reach out and support each other, because it's not just a financial hit, it's a psychological hit too.
You mentioned the impact on identity, especially after years of public service in a space that apparently now is less valued than it used to be. What impact does that have as it plays out over time on individuals who were affected and their family members?
Another great question. I think it's something we really want to study over time. After 1 year or 15 months out, we see that people are really struggling. They're struggling not only with finding a job, but they lost not only a career, but a sense of calling. So having to recalibrate it is a lot of really hard work. Being in the Foreign Service and working in international development affected families, not just employees. We saw that 48% of USAID Foreign Service officers experienced dual job loss. So it goes from financial hardship to being a substantive shock for families. And we also see children affected. 80% of respondents noted that their children struggled. It was a really disruptive event, not just a parent losing a job, which is hard enough on its own, but for those based overseas, it was losing housing. It was having to change schools. But I think more than anything, getting back to identity, people were really proud. Families were really proud of their work, helping rebuild education systems, helping provide emergency food aid, helping to get small businesses off the ground as a way to alleviate poverty. So there is a real unmooring that has happened, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of multifaceted work. Programs that provide job search support or traditional reskilling aren't just enough. It has to look at all of those components. It has to provide social support. It has to look at the psychological distress and the mental health components, in addition to just translating a resume for another sector.
And Jamie, what does this tell you about what happens when you dismantle a workforce built around a mission, not just a job?
That it's long, hard, and uneven, and the wounds are deep and real and long-lasting. There was one great quote in one of the responses that said, "I really wish the world understood how resilient we are. We've survived disease outbreaks and coups, and we've been evacuated from countries. We've missed weddings and funerals. We've had to be really creative with how we support and grow our families in harsh environments. But there's this deep sense of betrayal, and that's not going away, and that needs to be addressed."
Jamie Oberlander is a former Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Agency for International Development. We'll post this interview along with a link to her report at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Check out the Federal Drive on demand wherever you get your podcasts. Still to come, the practice of project management isn't static, and neither is the exam. It's the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. I'm Eric White, filling in for Terry. Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. I'm Eric White, filling in for Terry. The latest version of the PMP exam reflects a shift towards how project work actually gets done today. It puts more weight on real-world judgment and less on textbook recall. Joining the Federal Drive earlier to walk us through what's different and why it matters, Dr. Kelly Hoyer, VP of Learning at the Project Management Institute.
You've announced from the Project Management Institute a new version of the PMP exam coming out in July. Talk to me about why now is the right time to change that exam and what exactly is going to be different about the new one.
Yes, Terry. So as you know, the PMP, or Project Management Professional certification, is a professional credential that has been around for many years and is recognized globally as a marker of success and capability in leading and managing projects. Now, the certification has been around for many years. It's evolved over the course of those years. And so this most recent refresh, as we call it, of the exam, reflects the way that project-driven work is changing and what matters for success, what constitutes good practice. Some of the specific shifts you'll see within the certification have to do with the emphasis on what we call business environment, or you can understand this as sort of organizational context. The exam itself is broken down into three main domains: people, process, and business environment. And more of the questions on the exam that exam takers will see after July 9th, which is when the new exam goes live, will have to do with managing and navigating complex organizational contexts, which I'm sure is extremely familiar as a phenomenon to your audience, Terry.
And so how then do you see the job of a project manager, or the role of a project manager changing that is driving these changes in the exam?
Yeah, so project management has always been about managing complexity and delivering value. A project, by definition, a program, is something that is designed to bring about change, to change something about the way things are, or to bring something new into the world. To do that requires a vast array of skills: stakeholder management, understanding and articulating value as it's understood by your team within the context of your mission, within your agency, or across different stakeholder groups. Our research at the Project Management Institute, which we conduct in an ongoing way, looking at global trends in project management, show that some of those skills I was just mentioning in navigating complexity and interpersonal management are more important now than ever. And that's because the context within which projects happen is becoming more complex, whether that's geopolitical trends or local political pressures, supply chain disruption. So being able to execute under ambiguity, to pivot quickly and understand and rearticulate what matters most in terms of the actual value you're trying to deliver with your project is more important now than ever before. And this shift in the exam, like similar shifts we see across the board in our work on the project professions, reflects that change.
Navigating complexity is certainly an important skill, but it seems to me like one that would be very difficult to test, in a sit-down exam. What parts of the exam have changed to bring more of that skill set to the table?
Great question, Terry. And to start with, completely agree with you. Being able to evaluate these skills is very challenging. And so we take the design of our examination extremely seriously. One of the concrete changes you'll see in the way that exam questions are delivered has to do with even more scenario-driven and complex scenario-driven questions. So if you're familiar with the PMP, it was always essentially based on situational questions. It's not a test of knowledge or recall or definitions of terms, although the language of project management is part of what's important in communicating the outcomes we're looking at. It's always been more about what would you do in this particular situation based on this set of factors that characterize the project. The new version of the exam has slightly more new question format that involves multiple questions appended to the same complex and evolving scenario, which we think is a step closer to the kinds of situational judgment that are important for project professionals in navigating complexity.
Dr. Kelly Hoyer is the Vice President of Learning at the Project Management Institute. Kelly, this exam also takes on a little bit more of everybody's favorite topic these days, artificial intelligence. How did you work that into the exam?
We're all tired of talking about AI, aren't we, Terry? But we can't stop because it's one of the most disruptive forces, across the board. And in project management, it is no different. So we recognize, and this changed the exam, just as we've recognized in the ways we've changed the courses and professional development we offer after the exam, we recognize how critical AI is to project-based work in a couple of different ways. One is that AI is increasingly, where permitted within an organizational context, the way that core project management tasks get done. Still overseen by an experienced practitioner, right, who needs to exercise judgment in evaluating the outputs. But things like meeting recaps and status updates, even Gantt charts, timeline planning, project charter assembly, right, are all things that can be significantly accelerated by AI. From our point of view, it's critical that the tactical skills you use in leveraging AI tools, as well as the judgment you apply in evaluating their outputs, are a core part of the project management skill set. It's also true that more and more projects that project managers will be called on to lead are about AI implementation or AI-based projects. And so understanding the mechanics of artificial intelligence is also becoming important, just as like a subject matter area for a broader and broader pool of project professionals. Now, to answer your actual question, which is how does this show up on the exam, AI is not a core knowledge area that is assessed on the PMP. It is still focused on the core capabilities and process, people, and business environment that are validated to be important for success. Where you will see AI showing up is within the context of those situational questions I was just mentioning, both the longer ones and also the shorter ones, where AI is recognized as a tool you might be using to execute your task or characterizing the project context that you're engaged in. The same thing goes, by the way, Terry, for sustainability, which is another area that our research has shown to be increasingly important to long and medium term project success, and a skill set that's more and more important for project professionals. So that's also something you'll see showing up within the context of the scenarios or project examples that are assessed on the exam.
Now, Kelly, the exam is not just for government project managers. It's business and like every domain. So for government project managers, what is it about this test that reflects their environment? But also, what is it about this credential that is especially useful to them?
That's a great question, and it makes me think of a statement that was recently put out by the OPM identifying a critical talent gap within federal agencies and across federal agencies, specifically around project and program management and analysis. So there's a hiring push in this dimension because I think it reflects a recognition of the importance of project management as a skill set for driving outcomes that serve the public good. What specifically within the exam pertains to this context? As you say, Terry, the assessment is designed to be industry and sector neutral. It focuses on skills that I think those who've worked in the public sector will recognize as extremely important, including stakeholder management, including across many competing entities with various motivations. Also, managing in some cases significant investments and long time horizons where the public good is one of the outputs that is being measured as whether or not the project has delivered value. That is fully in line with the way value is understood and articulated within the exam and within our evolving body of research as well.
You've changed some of the pre-qualifications for being eligible to take the exam. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so this is personally exciting to me, and I think a really important step forward for us. There are a number of requirements to sit for the PMP exam. It is for experienced professionals, and so in addition to a number of years of professional experience, there's also prior education and training requirements. What we've done with this next version of the exam is make it easier for those with associate's degree or vocational training to have that prior learning recognized as part of what qualifies them to sit for the exam, not just more traditional 4-year university degrees and so on. We think this is especially important in recognizing those who've had more non-traditional career paths, which is often true of the most talented project managers.
And as you roll out this new version, what are you going to be watching for to determine whether or not it's hitting the mark?
Yeah, I think success for us, Terry, would really look like the PMP continuing to be recognized, especially within the government and public sector, as a stamp of approval from a global entity like PMI, and also a validation of a project professional's readiness to navigate complexity, quickly understand a fast-changing environment, and pivot as necessary, as well as applying both the people and the technical skills that are important for driving high investment, high stakes, long-term projects and programs.
Dr. Kelly Hoyer is VP of Learning at the Project Management Institute. We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Listen to the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Federal unions and nonprofit groups are asking a federal court to temporarily bar USDA from carrying out a reorganization that will move thousands of employees across the country. USDA leaders have repeatedly said the upcoming relocations will not lead to much attrition among its ranks, but internal documents contradict this claim. In newly uncovered documents, USDA wrote it's counting on a significant number of employees who quit rather than relocate. Federal News Network's Jory Heckman joins us with all the details. Jory, welcome aboard.
Hey, Eric. Great to be here.
So what are the plaintiffs actually seeking in this lawsuit other than a stop to the reorganization itself?
That's a big part of what they're asking for. They're asking a federal judge in San Francisco to temporarily block USDA from carrying out these reorganizations. But the grounds on which they're making that claim, they're saying that this is going to be a lot more turbulent of a move than what USDA has been saying for the better part of a year now. USDA last year said that they were going to move more than half of their headquarters-based, DC-based employees to parts all across the country. And earlier this year, they came back with more details saying that these reorganization plans were going to impact a lot of its subcomponent agencies as well. So they're saying that the amount of attrition with these upcoming moves is going to be so significant that these agencies aren't going to have enough staff to do their missions as required by law. And so they say that this is going to be a hugely disruptive matter in the coming months.
What do the internal USDA documents themselves have to say about all of this?
Right. So this is all part of USDA's agency RIF and reorganization plan. All agencies were instructed by an executive order to put these plans together back in April of 2025. And through this court battle, we got our first look at USDA's version of this plan. What that plan states is that they were looking to bring USDA's workforce down by about a quarter compared to levels that we saw last year. And so some efforts to downsize the workforce already took place with the deferred resignation program, with the reductions in force, a couple of situations there. But USDA said that one other way to downsize its workforce would be these upcoming relocations because, as you mentioned in the lead, Eric, they expect that a significant number of employees will decide to quit rather than relocate to keep their jobs. And that directly contradicts what we've heard from USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins, as well as other senior leaders like the Deputy Secretary Stephen Vaden. He told lawmakers last year that this would actually be a pretty successful move because of so much of the rifts and the other turbulence happening to the federal workforce, that because the job market in D.C. is so tough these days that many people may actually decide to make the move that wouldn't otherwise choose to do so.
We're speaking here with Federal News Network reporter Jory Heckman. What kind of timeline are the employees and the plaintiffs involved in this case looking at? How soon will they be asked to make that relocation if they are going to?
Right. So obviously this court case complicates things quite a bit, but what we've seen is that in some of these relocation notices, employees have already been asked to make this decision already, this difficult decision of whether they will quit their jobs or whether they will move across the country to keep their jobs. The deadline is passed for some components of USDA. Others have yet to get their relocation notices, and this matter in the lawsuit will probably put those relocation notices on hold. That's one of the things they're asking the federal judge in this case to do, is to put a hold on these relocation notices and stop USDA from carrying out any separations of employees in cases where they have said, no, I'm actually not going to move.
In the policy measure where relocation is not part of it and they just straight up are planning staffing cuts. How deep has USDA gone on that front rather than forcing a relocation to some employees?
In some cases, based on what we've seen with these internal agency RIF and reduction plans, the staffing cuts would be pretty significant for USDA. And this is more than just the 25% quarter cut. As far as the top line numbers, USDA components would see significantly different cuts below that. For example, the Food and Nutrition Service, which USDA has renamed as the Food and Nutrition Administration, what they would be looking at is a reduction of about half of their workforce. And these documents also call for de-emphasizing food stamps, which is, of course, the supplemental nutrition program that a lot of people, millions of people, rely on for food assistance. It's one of the biggest food assistance programs that USDA carries out. So for half of their workforce potentially to be out the door here, that's a pretty significant cut, and it remains to be seen how the agency would continue to meet its mission if it does see staffing cuts on par with what the agency is considering here.
We've been down this road before, right? I remember this from the first Trump administration as well, the calling of relocations, particularly for some of these sub-agencies in USDA, oddly enough. How have similar relocations gone in the past?
In the past, they have pretty much not gone as well as USDA would have hoped. The fact is that a vast majority of agency relocations in 2019 under the first Trump administration, the vast majority of employees who were impacted by this, they decided they would quit their jobs rather than relocate. In that case, they were being asked to relocate to Kansas City, Missouri. A significant majority of employees, somewhere in the neighborhood of 75% of them, chose to leave and find work elsewhere rather than pursue that relocation. What we've seen with internal union surveys suggests that we may see similar numbers under a much larger reorganization effort here. As opposed to hundreds of employees in 2019, the agency is looking to move thousands of employees. And so this would be a similar percentage of employees leaving, but the scale of those employees, the total number would be a lot higher.
Federal News Network reporter Jory Heckman, thank you for that update.
Thanks, Eric.
And be sure to check out Jory's story at federalnewsnetwork.com. The Federal Drive with Terry Gerton is produced by me, Eric White, along with Michelle Sandifort. Our web editor is Stephanie Wright. For the latest updates, stay with federalnewsnetwork.com or follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm Eric White filling in for Terry Gerton. Thanks for listening.